So hello everyone and welcome to this podcast, 10 questions about cloud. Today we have Rehan as a guest. Welcome, Rehan.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to answering your questions.
Cool. So I always start the podcast with asking my guest to introduce himself, basically who you are, what you do, so that the listeners can know more about you.
So, like Pablo said, I'm Rehan. I'm a developer and architect and an AWS junkie at heart, and I'm consuming an unhealthy amount of coffee, just trying to focus on serverless and everything that AWS has to offer. I'm also the organizer of an meetup here in South Africa for AWS, and I do the occasional presentation as well. I also have a blog where I write a few blogs during the year, and I help the community like wherever I can on the Slack channels in hashtag AWS. I'm always answering questions. I also I have a very strong background in electronic communication engineering. That's what I studied, but I since shifted my focus to AWS and programming. And it was like last year, a few months ago, that I was honored to join the AWS Hero program. So I became a community hero, and that's quite an interesting experience. I also have a few AWS certificates, and I just enjoy developing, architecting microservices, and just developing still. So my favorite languages are JavaScript and TypeScript, like recently Golang, and then also PHP in the past. And I'm like very multilingual, but those are the ones I'm working with at the moment. Yeah, that's a bit about me.
Yeah, it sounds really interesting, and thank you for sharing that. I will, of course, post your blog and all your social networks on the comments and on the description of the podcast, so that everyone can contact you in case they are interested or they just want to read your blog.
Okay.
So next question is more related to your cloud journey. Maybe you can share with us about your first steps towards the cloud.
Okay. Let me just rewind a little bit. So I mentioned that I studied engineering. So there's electronics engineering, but I studied two things at the same time. There's engineering and also programming. I'm at a college, so I did the engineering part time through the University of South Africa, and then the programming full time. So after about 4 years of that, I did 1 year of internship, and during that year, I started also working for a few companies, just doing like a few projects and stuff. And then I went to work for one of them. So just like even before I started, the CTO told me, go and check that AWS Lambda stuff out. I want to use that. And before I started, I really struggled with Node.js at that point, and just trying to figure Lambda out. I had no experience whatsoever with AWS, any cloud or Lambda or serverless or Node.js. And yeah, so that was a big struggle. But once I started to understand it, I got really obsessed with how it works and the possibilities that unlocks. So I climbed a small ladder. I climbed a small ladder in that company and became lead dev, leading a small team of 3 to 5 people, where we managed about 30 mobile apps and a legacy Java system. And I gained a lot of experience there because we had to move that legacy Java to a PHP front end, and the back end then was everything on AWS, Lambda, Node.js, and serverless. So that was a very interesting experience. And after about 2 years, I moved to a company that sends SMSs, but millions of SMSs per day, lots of servers, where they actually didn't host in any cloud. That was in one of the local data centers here in South Africa. And also that's where I gained some experience from Elasticsearch, managing a 10 terabyte Elasticsearch cluster, which was fun and also terrible at the same time. And then I went to a consultancy-based company where I got some experience working with AWS serverless in a banking environment. And then also I did a few projects for MIT in the US. And now I am at ShipLogic, where we are automating and revolutionizing the way parcels are being delivered. So we are thriving for a serverless first company. It's microservices everywhere with a bit of Golang and Lambda functions, but unfortunately, we have some servers because we are using RDS. So RDS for our database, and then Redis and PG Bouncer in there as well. And yeah, but we try to use as much of AWS managed services as possible. So that's a bit about my background.
Yeah, really interesting and a very long way, I would say. So it sounds really interesting, like you started with AWS directly developing a Lambda, and sounds like a little bit hardcore.
Yeah, so I had no prior experience there, and I was just told to try it out and get it working, because we were a small team there. So I just took initiative, and it eventually paid off.
Cool,
but
very cool.
It was actually much easier back then, I think, because that's almost like 5 years back, and that's roundabout when serverless and Lambda became popular. But at that point, there wasn't as many serverless things that you could use. I mean, it was basically API Gateway and Lambda, and that was about it. And so I think it was much easier to start than it would be to start now by just jumping into that serverless world.
Yeah, that's true. All right. So I believe that the cloud skills are going to be kind of a standard skill over the coming years for almost any kind of job or any kind of job in the IT industry. What do you think about this? Do you think that it's going to be mandatory, at least having a kind of a basic cloud knowledge to have a job in the IT industry?
I think so. I think it would be very beneficial for you to have that skill when you start. And that's what I also saw from, like I said, I'm at the previous company that I worked at, I'm at the consultancy, we got a bunch of interns, but straight out of the university, they don't even touch the cloud. So we did a first introduction to the cloud, and they were just blown away about what you can do and actually how easy it is. You don't have to every time set up a server from scratch, install Linux and stuff. So I think having basic cloud experience will be beneficial. But I don't think it's like really needed. Like in my case, like when I started with AWS Serverless and Lambda, I didn't have any experience, but I taught myself. And I don't think that everybody can just jump in and do it. I also stumbled and made mistakes, but I quickly learned from them. So I think just having that certificate or that experience or that knowledge first helps from making those early mistakes and just joining a team with already knowledge. And that is actually great. But if you can afford it, I actually like to make mistakes and learn. And that's almost like the most fun part of programming and developing is making mistakes and learning how not to do it so that you can do it better in the future.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Learning by doing, or just testing until it works. And that's at least my way to do the things, and it works really. You really learn how the things really work. So next question is one question I get a lot of times, which is related to the cloud providers. You already mentioned AWS, but there are, as you already know, other cloud providers. But sometimes the question I get is which cloud provider to use. I know it's a tricky question because there is no an easy answer. However, I would like to know your opinion about that.
So for me, it's always going to be AWS first, just because I have a lot of experience with it and things. But I have done quotes previously for like 4 other clouds, and that's just company preference. So like certain times companies would approach you and tell you they want to host it in Azure, like they already know it, they already are comfortable with it, or maybe it's for a compliance and like regulations that actually have to be in Azure and they can't be on AWS, or it might be like a lot of different factors. But I know that you might want to host in Azure, especially if you are if you have Microsoft SQL Server or like Microsoft SQL servers and stuff, because they have discounts. I think if I'm not 100% sure, but I think they have discounts for like your Microsoft type of workloads that you don't get by hosting on AWS, for example. So I think that, yeah, so there's certain advantages for certain providers, and Azure will definitely be that Windows one, and depending on the company, you would probably choose one or the other, or they would have a preference.
Yeah, I know it's not an easy question. Depends. One thing that you mentioned on your skills, if on the cloud skills, if you are very familiar with one over the other, then maybe it's better to go with the one that you already know. However, depends also on the region where you are. Depends also on the use case, because there are some providers who are, that have more experience or more services or a focus on one area over the others.
That's actually a very good point, like that you just mentioned about the region, because AWS like launched a region in East Africa only last year, like around this time, and but up until then we had to use EU1 West, which is in Ireland, and like that was the closest main region to us. Okay. But now that they moved, latency dropped by like 600 to 800 milliseconds on every request. So like opening an application now within the AWS South Africa region, it feels like that application is actually just running on your desktop. That's how fast it is. So it's very nice that they moved, because Azure was here previously, and that's why many companies in South Africa chose it. That's why many companies chose Azure, because they had to keep the data within South Africa. But now that AWS is here, they have 2 options.
Exactly. Yeah, that's why I say the region is really, really important to consider when choosing the cloud provider, as well as other reasons that you already mentioned. But there is also another option, which is multi-cloud or hybrid clouds, which are also approaches which companies have to consider. And I would like to know your opinion about that. What do you think about these hybrid or multi-cloud approaches?
I think so. There's almost like 2 different concepts in there. Like first, multi-cloud. I don't like multi-cloud at all. So basically, if you have the option to choose multi-cloud or single cloud, just if you have that option, multi-cloud will always be the wrong answer. Because like for me, it's going to be more expensive, and you need to like have people within your company that has in-depth knowledge of all of those multi-clouds. And I say it's going to be more expensive because you can't use cloud native offerings. You have to use something that is in a container and deploy that within that cloud's container orchestration. So you're probably going to use like on Google, like those Docker that they have, on AWS ECS, and then you have to always develop within these containers, because those application code within the containers can be deployed on every cloud. If you're going to do like cloud native services for each cloud, you basically have to develop 3 different applications, and that's just crazy. So I would say that multi-cloud is basically the wrong answer in most situations, except if you are forced to do it by some kind of compliance or like life-threatening critical application that always has to be running. So that's multi-cloud, but a hybrid cloud is, like, in my mind, when you connect back to your on-premise data center or something, and that a lot of companies has, where they have to just connect their on-prem data center that's sitting somewhere to the cloud, and then they would run both of them at the same time, or do most of their computing in the cloud, for example, but storage is on-prem, keeping the data here. So multi-cloud is always the wrong answer. Like, even for like multi-cloud couldn't even save Parler because they got shut down was just for actually just being bad and not really adhering to good standards and stuff. So even if they could go multi-cloud, that wouldn't have saved them.
So what my opinion about multi-cloud is, it's, in my opinion, it's not an IT decision, it's more a business decision, which means that here there are some considerations. They don't, because doing multi-cloud obviously adds a lot of complexity. There are 2 stacks, 2 infrastructures you have to maintain and develop continuously. And you need also people who has the knowledge and the skills to develop both clouds. However, in my opinion, it's more a business decision. There are some companies which don't want to put all their eggs into one basket, into the same basket. They want to, diversify, and they don't trust just on one company. They prefer, or just, in my opinion, multi-cloud is a very good use case for disaster recovery or a backup. In case there is a problem with one on one side, you can use the other side. However, it's a really complex topic, and in my opinion, a business decision more than an IT decision.
Yes, it's basically when like management tells you that they want an active system, and then you go through the loops, you design the system or just like the concept of it, and when they ask how much it costs, then usually they change their mind.
Yeah, for example, they also have to double the team, add a lot of complexity, double the costs, of course. But there are some use cases where it is really useful. So let's continue now with the next topic, which is the cloud market share. We already mentioned like AWS, Azure, GCP from Google. There are a lot of them, Oracle, IBM, Alibaba. There are a lot of them. How do you see, or how do you think the cloud market share is going to look like in the next years? Because at the moment, it's really clear that AWS and Azure are leading. However, I think it's really interesting to talk about this topic.
So I don't think much is going to change. I think we are still going to have these leaders that's there on your Gantt chart there on the right top, where AWS is probably going to stay there. I think they are going to be the leader for a while, and then we are also going to have all of these smaller clouds as well. So like DigitalOcean, and now Alibaba is like also down there, but they are quite big in like the eastern side of the world. And that's another thing, is that you almost have like this divide between the Western cloud and then the Eastern cloud, or like what the Eastern world prefers to use or like must use because of compliance and like regulations, and then what the Western side can use. So I think that like that divide, I don't see that changing. For example, the US will never host like any government type of code applications and stuff on China, because China can just kill it there, like the server, if they want to. So the US will almost never use Alibaba unless there's a specific use case that they have to be in China. I know even just getting an AWS account in China is difficult, because I think you need to have a business license or like a registered business in China to and get an account there. So
Yes.
it's just like this split between the between the clouds, like in my eyes. Like I think that's going to stay like that, and I think that everybody is going to continue focusing on ML and AI services, just like reducing the barrier to entry for like non-ML or AI people to just consume those services easily and build ML and AI applications with it. I think like most providers are focusing on that.
Okay, let's see how the future and the clouds evolve during the next years, because we cannot we don't know. However,
How do you feel about it? Because you work a lot with the China region, don't you?
Yes. Well, I see they are expanding to the west side. I see some successful. I saw some successful cases using Chinese cloud providers. Also big companies, not only small companies. However, the political thing is really it's really an important topic, and it's always on the on the list. Also security. However, as you already mentioned, using in China the American cloud providers is also not that easy. They are very limited. They cannot even operate by themselves their platform. So they need support from a local provider, from a Chinese cloud provider in this case. However, I know companies which still they are using AWS or Azure in China, just because they have the skills, they know the platform, they know how to architect in that platform, and also there are some limitations. On the other hand, they know it, and it's basically easier because they have the knowledge of how the infrastructure and the platform works. So I see both things.
I'm on that skill thing. Is that I run a meetup here in South Africa for AWS, and there's lots of meetups here for for clouds like Google and Azure and things. But I actually looked it up before this, that they're in China and Japan and all those regions. I think there's one big AWS one in Japan, and like not a lot in China. I think there's a small one somewhere in Shanghai and Beijing, but I mean those are very large, very large population of people with just like a few hundred members in that AWS meetup groups. So that already tells you that there's not a lot of need or like a need for skill in that community.
So basically, Tencent and Alibaba, I have around the 60% of the cloud market share in China, and the AWS and Asia have around 10%, and the rest is Huawei, Baidu, and the other cloud providers.
That's much. That's much less than I expected it to be.
Yeah, it's like this at the moment, but I'm really interested on see how will this evolve during the next years, if they will grow or not, and see. I'm really curious about that. I'm also curious about the expansions plans of these Chinese cloud providers with Africa? Because at the moment I didn't hear much about that. I know that
That's interesting. I'll also keep my ear to the ground.
Yeah. So I know that they are trying to expand, but I don't know how far they are. And curious about Google is the presence of GCP in South Africa. Is there?
Yes, there's a few meetups here, and I actually don't know a lot of people that actually and companies that use it or that I've worked with, but I know there is some presence here. I won't be able to tell you how much or like.
Do they have a region there?
I actually don't know,
Okay.
but I think if I don't know, then probably I know. If I knew, then I would probably like I've used it or at least know about it. So I don't think they have.
Okay. Okay. So let's continue with the next question, which is I would like to know that you share with us one thing or one of the latest things that you learn about cloud. It can be a tool, a strategic, a technical topic, or something that you want to share with us.
So I think I will choose a tool like from your list. I've been using the AWS CDK for the past year and a half now, probably. I don't know if you've heard about it yet, but I'm just loving it. So that's my best infrastructure as code tool that AWS has. So I first started with bare CloudFormation, then moved to SAM that did a bit more, but it was still a bit CloudFormation-ish, and then do the CDK. And the CDK just automates all of that for you, where you just write your infrastructure as code, like actually TypeScript code, and then that generates this YAML for you that you can go and execute on AWS. But the cool thing about the CDK is that it's now also expanding. It isn't just for the AWS cloud anymore. They've recently partnered or worked with Terraform, and now there's a CDK for Terraform tool or module out. So you can basically use the CDK now to write, or actually you use the CDK, and then like it's different constructs or different like objects that you use, and then those objects are like all your Terraform objects, and then that generates Terraform for you, and then you execute the Terraform on Terraform. So you can basically now write like CDK code and actually execute it against other clouds like Google or Azure, or I'm not even sure what Terraform supports. I'm not a big Terraform fan. I prefer CloudFormation on the CDK. But so yeah, I would just give a shout out to the CDK. I'm just loving it, and it just makes things so easy. So earlier this week, I had to build like a ECS cluster. So it's basically a container cluster, and it just made it so easy because I just gave it the Docker file, and I had to set a few things up, but it was a mission to get Docker in Docker working on GitLab because I had to use a previous version. But like the long story short is when I just commit my Docker file to GitLab, it then builds it, pushes it to ECR, and then deploys it to Fargate. And all of that is done by a CDK behind the scenes. I just create about this amount of code for it, give it a Docker file, and then it does the uploading for me, the building of the image on GitLab. So that's just amazing to have that process in place easily. And I'm not even a DevOps guy, but I've been like kind of in this position for the last few weeks now to get DevOps right for our team. And like the CDK just makes that so easy.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. I worked with that a few years ago, maybe 1 or 2 years ago. I found it good. I found it very good. However, no, with the CDK, with AWS CDK.
Yeah.
However,
it was still in its early phases.
Yeah, that was my problem. It was on the early phases and it was not that developed. It was not even integrated with Terraform and all these features that you mentioned. And that was maybe my problem. I think I should give it a try right now with all the features, maybe change my mind.
Yeah, so if you're doing infrastructure as code, definitely try out CDK.
All right. Thanks for that tip. And just the last question, which is, it's related about the cloud information. There is a lot of information out there. However, we don't have the time to read or to get all this information. So it's sometimes very important to know which sources to choose to stay up to date. Could you share with us which are those sources that you use?
So firstly, my AWS sources. So I'm subscribed to Jeremy Daly's newsletter. It's called Off by None, and that's just a serverless one mainly. And then also to Jan Kui. He is also called the Burning Monk. He also has a blog that I usually read and subscribe to his newsletter as well. There's also Corey Quinn that has a newsletter called Last Week in AWS. I usually scroll through that as well. And the AWS YouTube channel. That's one of the things that I usually browse in the morning. So I would get a cup of coffee, get a biscuit or something, and then that would be my breakfast. But then I would first look at what's on YouTube. And usually there's some AWS video or something that I uploaded, or all of the reInvent videos that I'm still waiting for. But then when I get there, I would just watch later or something, and just and if they're short, I would watch them and just do my breakfast. There's also something called Cloud Pegboard, where they also send you every day just a list of new blogs or announcements, and I actually mainly use it for new region features, because we're building in South Africa now. That's what I'm using to actually get notified when a new service is released in this region. I'm also just looking at on Facebook. I've liked DevDO, that other blog site as well. So sometimes when I'm scrolling, I see something, or on Reddit, and then also on Twitter and LinkedIn. I must say Twitter, recently, that's probably been one of the biggest places where I kind of find my announcements, just because I'm following a few big personalities, especially in the AWS world. So I think actually I'm a bit overloaded now that I mentioned all my resources. I think I must tone down, there's quite a lot of them.
I mean, it's very important to be up to date, and at least, as you already said, all the news about your region or the services that you are interested or you're working with. I think it's very important to keep an eye on that.
Mm-hmm.
That was it, basically. We are done. So thank you very much for participating, for your time, and for sharing all your opinion, experience, and thoughts about cloud and the IT world in general. It's been a pleasure for me. Thank you very much again.
Thanks. I'll drop some of those links on the YouTube video when you share them, all of those resources I follow and the few that I mentioned. Also thanks for having me. It was actually very interesting to hear more about China and all of those regions and clouds, because I don't have any experience with them at all. And so that was really interesting. Thanks.
Yeah. So thank you very much. With this, we close the podcast, and see you in the next podcast. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.